everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Fulbrighter podcast. Fulbrighter is an exclusive networking platform for Fulbright alumni and grantees. The platform lets you keep up to date with news from the global community of Fulbrighters and connect with fellow alumni and grantees from around the world. If you are a current grantee or an alumni from an official Fulbright program, head to fulbrighternetwork.com to create your account. My name is Gabriele Jimenez, and I'm a journalist and the community manager for the Fulbrighter platform. Today, I will have a conversation with Joseph Douglas, a world-class guitarist and pedagogue who's currently conducting neuroscience research in Brazil on a Fulbright UMass Student Award. Joseph is a doctor of musical arts in classical guitar performance, and as a pedagogue, he has held positions at several schools across the United States, supporting students' musical development. At the Federal University of ABC in São Paulo, he is conducting research in the neuro music department. As part of his research, elementary school students are given musical and visual games designed by Douglas to test their computational thinking skills. Hi, Joseph. It is a pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Thank you, Gabby, for having me. I'm so excited to speak with you.
Amazing. So, first of all, I know that you have a little bit of history with Brazil. So, I wanted to understand a little bit about your choice. Why did you choose Brazil for your Fulbright Award? Was it something that you specifically chose, this country, or were you open to different countries? Can you tell us a little bit about that process of choosing where you wanted to go for your research?
Sure. I came to Fulbright very much near the end of my academic career. So I was in my doctorate, and a lot of Fulbrighters come when they're bachelor's or master's students. And I chose Brazil in part because I've always had a long connection with it. It was the very first place I ever visited outside of the United States. So I had the great fortune to do eco tours in the north of the country, in Manaus, to go fishing and see the dolphins and the great river communities over there. And I did that when I was 12, and it made such an impression on me. I remember walking into the airport and being struck by the Portuguese language, which was sort of like Spanish, which I was just starting to learn in school in the United States, but I couldn't quite understand it, but I understood it was similar. The people were so kind. I became obsessed with the food and the experience as a whole. And that really set the stage for me to maintain this connection with Brazil that, while not immediate, from 12 to being a teenager and a young adult, it kept popping up in my life. As a musician at the conservatories in New York, Manhattan School of Music, I took a Brazilian music class by a Brazilian percussionist. And it was an amazing class. The musical heritage of Brazil is just so rich. And so as a young guitarist and a musician, I fell in love with it again, having had that first experience, knowing, oh, I've been there before. And then being able to understand that there's so many different cultures to explore, not just this northern region. I later fell in love with Carioca and got married and had this 10-year relationship where I learned Portuguese through that relationship, and I think that really solidified my choice. So when it came to a Fulbright application, there really was no other option because I had to go explore what became a new part of me. I think I described it in my application letter as, I'm no longer just an American. I've become something hybridized, something in between, from the food to the culture to the music to how I live my daily life. So for me, being here in Brazil is sort of like discovering a new part of myself, which started when I was 12 and is now being sort of capped off and refined with this Fulbright.
And how did you hear about the Fulbright program itself? Because you said you came across it a little bit later on in your career. So, how did you hear about those opportunities?
So USC is a top producer of Fulbright students. I think for 13 years they've produced at several every cycle. And they have the grants office there, Katie Capra, and the various professors there. They're always on the lookout for students that are interested in this kind of thing. I heard rumblings about this program from the professor that I was working as a teaching assistant for in the music department at Thornton. And I thought to myself, well, that sounds really cool. Like, an opportunity to travel abroad, do some research, but what could it possibly be on? I have no idea. Am I a Fulbright student? I don't know. But when as my doctorate started to finish up, I thought, well, I should apply anyways. I'm casting my net wide, and kind of I held it deeply in my heart that this would be a good idea for me. And then USC's institutional system was so supportive in terms of the review process. I think I reviewed each of the documents. I did 8 or 9 revisions with various professors and Fulbright alumni and faculty, and it was very involved. And they very much want their students to engage in this process, which helps a lot. And I don't know if that would have happened if I was at a different institution.
Well, that sounds great. And a shout out to USC's departments there for supporting somebody who's interested on applying for Fulbright. Uh, I would love to hear a little bit more as well about your interest in music. I know often people who are very talented, in the musical industry or just, musicians in general, their interest is kind of something that comes early on. So was that also the case for you? How did you, become interested in music? I just love to hear a bit more about your journey to become, a world-renowned guitarist. So can you tell us about that journey?
Sure. I started playing guitar somewhat late in life. By musician standards, I was, a teenager. I was 10, 11, 12, becoming, I was in that period of my life. I used to apply to get to university. I used this story a lot where I learned to play guitar because of the video game Guitar Hero came out roughly around the same time. And I'm dating myself by mentioning that. But that a friend of mine, we would spend hours playing this game, pretending to be a guitarist, and he eventually got an instrument. And I followed. We would just hang out after school and play. And compared to like pianists or violinists who start maybe when they're 3 or 4 or 5, it's a late start. And that friend and I, we both became musicians. He plays metal guitar in New Jersey, and he has a band, and I'm a classical musician because I went a completely different route. So it's interesting how the same formation produces 2 musicians of very different stripes. Um, but the process, I think a lot of the support from my family encouraged it. I was very interested in orchestral music. So from meeting the guitar and popular music, I went to orchestras, and my school orchestra said, hey, can I play the guitar? And they said, no, here's a contrabass, here's a cello. And I've ended up playing bass for 7 years and cello for a couple, timpani for another couple years. And music just became like my identity. It was the thing that I was known for. I think I was voted most musical in my high school, in the yearbook awards. And some of the coolest teachers I had in high school were musicians. They were always kind of off kilter and really interesting. And at an early age, I was looking for more instruction, so I just Googled after school music programs, and the Juilliard popped up. And I was living in New Jersey, which is at least an hour and a half, 2 hours by bus from New York. I didn't know any better, so I applied to the Juilliard high school program, and I got in. So I started doing that. I was traveling back and forth between my hometown and New York once a week for 3 years during my high school career. And I think because I got into such a prestigious music school, with relatively little training and all this other background, I thought, well, this seems to be a viable path for me. Not only did it reaffirm my identity as, oh, this is what I'm good at, but it sort of catapulted me forward so that when I went to conservatory in New York later for another 6 years, it gave me a pathway. Though my relationship with music has changed over the years, and even now it's in conversation with the work I'm doing here in Brazil. It's in conversation with community. And when I was doing my doctorate, in some ways, I've been pushing against the boundaries of what conservatories, which are just like, you lock yourself in a room and practice guitar, practice your instrument. And I did lots of that. But I always wanted to do other things. I wanted to learn, I wanted to compose. I loved literature. I loved the sciences to a certain degree. And I was thinking about computational thinking and programming as early as my, end of my bachelor's. I was the master of VR at the Manhattan School of Music, where I put on virtual reality events when those headsets first came out. And because I felt convinced that these technological changes are going to be needed to be shown to music students. It's going to affect them at some point. I don't know when, but I still believe that. And so I've always had this, and then I don't know if the institutions necessarily gave me space. It was always a fight. Though USC, again, shout out to USC, their doctoral program allowed me to really refine being a guitarist, and then to reach out and take engineering classes, to take design classes, and build these cross-cultural relationships where I was investigating what does it mean to be a musician, and then I learned what does it mean to be a programmer, what does it mean to be a designer, a game maker. And I learned that these are very different cultures of thinking, which I had to sort of enter as a neophyte, someone who's learning the ropes, and then I got better at it. And eventually, I think the community building through the projects I did helped. But, music has become this thread that I've tracked where I'm performing, and it's brought me to new relationships in all these other sectors of learning in my life.
And to go with that, your biography also mentions you as a pedagogue. So I was just, wondering a little bit about when did you get into teaching? When did you realize, you could actually kind of mix your musical background with, teaching skills? When did that come into the story?
I've always liked teaching. I remember being like a kid and, getting to go teach the class is a fun thing. In elementary school, it was a precocious, lovely opportunity that some of my teachers gave me. But when I was in college in New York, I think it was a matter of survival. Most musicians become teachers, and it's required. I mean, that's how we pass the tradition forward. It's fundamentally an oral tradition, and you really can't write down how to do music, even though we have books that attempt to do these things. It's a one-on-one, conveyance of, individual to individual type, knowledge. And so, I was teaching Ezra guitar, which is still in New York, and I was teaching at the Bronx Conservatory. And I was teaching individually. Community members from Manhattan would reach out, and I would, go to their apartments and teach guitar once a week, private lessons. And so teaching, performing a little bit, playing ensemble music, this became the life of the musician that I did while in conservatory. It's what I did in Los Angeles. I was teaching at the Silver Lake Conservatory, which is a community school founded by the bass player of the Chili Peppers, Flea. And they have an incredible program where, they're inviting community members to do rock music, and I was their resident classical guitarist. So it's a matter of survival, but it also became a vocation in the sense that I realized I really loved teaching individually and then in also classroom settings. In some ways, doing the doctorate was a way for me to test out, well, do I want to go into academia and teach this new level of student? Because most of my students were elementary school aged kids at the beginning of their musical journey. But then working with college students is a very different endeavor. And so lecturing and building, interesting conversations about music and culture and the guitar, teaching at a very high level, it became it's addictive, really. It's such a dopamine kick to be able to see that you're helping people in a way where it's like they may not even realize how much they're learning, but you see it in their faces. They just light up when they realize something new. And I was even talking to some of the Fulbright ETAs the other day, and they were talking about much the same thing. Part of their motivation for teaching is like, I can't believe I'm helping these people in such a way. And so teaching music rapidly became that. for me, and I just did it for 10 years. And it's now a skill that I'm using here in Brazil, and learning how to apply it in a Brazilian context, because it's a little different.
So it sounded like it was kind of a natural course for you getting involved with teaching. I was, as you were talking about it so passionately, I was thinking, was there something specific you were focusing on as a teacher? Like, was there a main goal that you had with your students? Because, it could be like you want them to really be good at at the instrument, or you could be your goal could just be that it helps them deal better with their emotions, or it helps them build a profitable career. I don't know, was there something that was driving you as a teacher that you felt was your main drive?
Sure. I think it was particularly with music lessons when you develop this very intense individual relationship with kids. And I don't know, when I was growing up, having a music teacher, a maestro or someone that was teaching you, they become a mentor. I remember my professor from Juilliard, she's still there. Well, yeah, I think she's still teaching there. And I used to go to her apartment in New York, and she would feed me rice and meatballs. And she'd make sure she'd give us chocolates after, and she was like our mom, and so it's a very personal relationship. So I think the emotional and regulation aspects of, well, how do you be a human being? Everyone's on this journey of navigating life and whatnot. But the issue, I think, is depending on the context. If I'm teaching individually for a private school, or just one-on-one, I have more latitude to say, okay, today we're going to think about what does it mean to be human, and we're going to talk about your emotions, and we'll do 30% teaching and 70% therapy session, versus working with younger kids or working with a school where you have a concert in 2 months that you have to prepare for, and you don't have time to necessarily give that kind of attention to those students. Some of that's just part of the market, but always, I think, being it's always in the back of your mind to try to help these people. And I think musicians, people come to music to feel better, to regulate their emotions. And I think with that, and myself included, that we come with other issues that maybe other people don't have. So there's more to regulate. If that's a polite way of saying it. I remember at Manhattan School of Music, we had 5 or 6 therapists on staff for like 800 people. So it was high. It was a lot of mental illness challenges in music, caused by and perhaps from generated from. And I think the lessons and the mentorship that I'm very attracted to the mentorship aspect of it. And when I went to go to university and teach students there, I continued to do that and teach the information. Of course, it's important, but making human to human connections is becoming the thing that I want to do with my life, because it's more important. And Brazil's showing me that too.
And talking about that, you've mentioned earlier that community was an aspect of your work, right? So, how important is music in order to build community? Because I feel there's so many different ways you can build community, and we've had a guest here, Kelly Rich Neal. So, if you're listening to us, you can always go back to her episode. She talks about how music, but specifically dance, was something that helped her build community and understand that aspect of the art as well as an important one. So in your case, what do you think about music as a tool for building community, or how do you integrate it in your work, specifically this idea of like community building through music?
I think it's vital, and something, the arts have always been a place where people of common interest can gather. It's got a long history of, how does music work? And is music the classical Western tradition where we've turned it into a museum piece that, we have to play all the notes right, and it happens in these sacred spaces. Whereas music making, exists on a spectrum that's oftentimes community-based. It's very seldomly I'm going to practice for 4 or 5 hours in a room to present in a couple months a single concert or a series of concerts. So the tradition that I trained in, I'm finding, is it's community based, but the more naturalistic way to build community has been through popular music, through other genres, and making music with other people. Um, so I having a studio while teaching, you can build community. Where I remember some of the parties I went to in LA, it was, my studio or another studio. Some of my close friends were former students who I went to their weddings and I played their weddings. Or I remember my landlady in Los Angeles would invite me to perform at her yearly Hanukkah party. And she'd give me a little cash, but she was my landlady, so we were friends, and she'd hang out. We'd hang out afterwards, and I'd meet her friends, and so offering music to others has always been a good way to just give of your time, give of your expertise, and people always appreciate that, and you build connections that way. I remember, the intersection of music and Brazil has always been really strong. So not only did I go to Brazil in part because of music, but I'm finding that my identity as a quasi Brazilian, person. I love the culture so much, and I'm assimilating with it as when I can. I've met guitarists that are from Brazil, and because I can speak the language, that makes a big difference. I've met engineers who, through music, I have engineering connections because, oh, you're a guitarist, I'm a guitarist. We both love guitar, but we took different pathways. You became an engineer, I became a musician, but we also share these similar interests. Here in Brazil, the professor I'm working with, I did not know this, but he is an intermediate level classical guitarist. And so I suspect part of the reason he was interested in working with me was because, well, here's a guy who wants to do neuroscience research, cold emailing out of the blue. But he's a musician. I'm a musician. That's interesting. And now we bond over this shared love of the guitar, which is so strong in Brazil. Even just last night, I was with the English teaching assistants at a jazz club in Pinheiros, and while there, I ran into somebody from the choro community who I recognized, and so I got to talk to him and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I haven't been to the holidays recently, but I promise I'm gonna come. I'll see you next week." And we had a great conversation about this. So, the music scene here in São Paulo is incredibly close knit. And then internationally, I'm finding that the Brazilian music, or classical guitar and Brazilian music are two intersecting identities that I can. It's not exchange. It's I can share I can share in sort of an intercambio style uh, um, experience to both gain new experience and gain learning and offer it to other people. And so my entire community is built around music because it's my life. I don't know how else to build community unless the guitar is involved, and I seem to be doing it even by accident.
All right. So yeah, it seems like another natural way that music has kind of, inserted itself into your life. So here's something to go along with what you said. Here's how I think it differs from what would be expected from a musician with your background, which is, how does a conservatory trained guitarist and music teacher suddenly become interested in neuroscience? So, what was the drive to kind of look at this field of neuroscience?
Sure. It's a tough question because I'm endlessly curious about anything. And it's always been a challenge for me to focus in on one thing, which is ironic given that I spent 10 years focusing on one thing. But I was always good at science. I was always good at math. I discovered programming in during my bachelor's, a music, a conservatory trained soprano singer. She graduated in New York, and then she realized she didn't like the lifestyle of trying to go for auditions and gigging. And it's there's a lot of great things about being a musician, but the financial aspect is not usually one of them. And it's hard to survive in a big city like that while doing so. So she decided to learn how to program. She's now an engineer at Apple. And I remember I had a conversation with her asking about what is this thing programming and what does it do and why are musicians good at it? And we had this interesting conversation where she was also thinking of the same reasons. Well, maybe something about my musical background or our musical training is conducive to learning this technical skill, which is in great demand. And so I started self-teaching myself programming, and I was always interested in emergent technologies. Video games was how I started my music career. And so it's always had, it's a hobby and it's something that, interactivity and play. And so when I'm playing music, in some ways, I'm more interested in the feeling of playing music, not necessarily the sound of playing music, which is, I think a lot of musicians share it, but may not agree with the emphasis. And so when I went to do my doctorate, all the self-taught programming knowledge became, let's refine this because now I know that I don't know what I'm talking about. I learned enough to know that I was completely lost. And so I found teachers there that were teaching Python and different programming languages and design. And so through music and programming, I was able to integrate with the game design community. And now I'm doing AI and ethics research with the University of California, Santa Barbara Embedded Ethics Lab. And that's because of my connections through programming and my interests in, my teaching is, entering into ethics. But the neuroscience aspect came around because when I went to my doctorate, I noticed all the attention and the fact that sitting in a class with 60 or 70 undergraduate or even, master's level programmers, and I realized that I quickly became one of the top students. I had some of the highest grades. It was not an easy class if you're all at the same level. And I thought to myself, well, why would it be that a musician like me would be able to so quickly get used to this? I started teaching programming to first-year students as a guest lecturer through music. And that seemed to also help. Thinking about, if we draw the parallel between cycles in time and how computers work essentially the same way, but just many, many times faster, we can embody the learning of programming, and then it's more fun, and people's ears prick up when instead of having to look at this kind of arcane text, which is programming language, we can feel and understand an abstract version of it. That pointed me to question, well, why? And so for the Fulbright, I said, well, we have to look at our brains. We need to find, maybe there's something that we can find that's objective, that shows that, oh, there's more activity in the brain. And I didn't even know what that meant at the time, because I'm coming to neuroscience as a neophyte, just like I did with all my other extra interests. And so it's a lot of reading books and articles and catching up and navigating cultures of new knowledge. But if we can find an objective measure, then we can prove or at least support this subjective assertion, which I'm feeling and hearing from other professors and other teachers. So that's why neuroscience and not biology or something else. It had this very specific goal to rationalize what I was seeing, something about myself, but also at the University of Southern California. And through the connections there, I was pointed, in Brazil. I asked my Brazilian teaching, one of my professors was Brazilian. I said, who should I talk to? And she gave me a list of 3 or 4 names. And my professor, João Ricardo Sato at UFABC, he was on that list, and he's been an amazing affiliate.
Now that you're talking about specifically your professor here in Brazil, I wanted you to expand a little bit on your research in Brazil. So, what exactly you're researching here? What are your goals, ultimate goals of that research? So, I think we have been able to grasp a little bit how, you ended up in neuroscience. It's quite an interesting path, right? From music to programming to ending up in like, okay, I need to understand the brain now. So how is that going? And what exactly is your research in Brazil about?
Yeah, so the research is, I proposed to create interdisciplinary games. So the concept of interdisciplinarity has been an ongoing question in higher education and education in general for a couple of decades. And so I'm coming to it sort of, fresh young eyes. I haven't been dealing with it. So it's new and I'm excited about it. And also I think, the UFABC, the Federal University of ABC, and Brazil in general is very open to interdisciplinary work. I find that, like, just culturally speaking, people are very into, oh, you're a mathematician and you want to do this? Perfect, let's go. It's going to be great. I applied to do games, to scan the brains of students. So my professor, one of the schools that I'm working with, is also a research. We have ethics board approval to do research with those students with parental permission and et cetera, et cetera. And so I designed these games, and we're using something called FNIRS. It's hyperscanning. Essentially it's an array of light sensors that shoot little infrared laser beams into the cerebrum, the first 2 centimeters or so of the brain, and it measures blood oxygenation levels. So if you have this array, it has an emitter and a receiver. You can create this web of channels of measurements in real time, so that when you give a student a task, if you can measure how much oxygenated blood is appearing in particular regions. And so you'll see these dips. When activation in a particular region of the brain is higher, the blood oxygenation level dips, and then it comes back up. And so you can say, okay, that's higher activity versus somewhere else where there may not have been activity. All these things in combination allow us to describe something called functional connectivity. How connected are different regions of the prefrontal cortex, which is the forehead region of the brain. It's our newest, youngest region of the brain, and it is where a lot of the cognitive processing and problem solving, music is all over the brain. So, and oftentimes these systems are impossible to cover all of it, particularly portable systems, because we bring the system to the school so the kids don't have to go to, San Bernardo do Campo, which is not close to where the school is. It's quite a trek. But the idea between the two games is to compare a musical game with sequential thinking. So, while we're scanning the brains, kids are trying to organize melodies. The musical game I created presents a key melody with a certain number of notes. So, say 3 notes, and it plays a very simple melody, and then they have to reorder little colored shapes, which when you click on them, play one of the notes of the melody. So it's a musical puzzle. And so it's identifying 2 main regions of computational thinking, which is what is used in programming. But inside of computational thinking are, dozens of different identified skills. We're focusing on sequential thinking and working memory, which we can identify in the brain. Working memories, and both are in the prefrontal cortex. So it's a good 2 subcategories to identify. And when I applied, in some ways, I naively didn't know how complicated the notion of computational thinking is, because the literature, despite a literature review, there's so much talk about, well, what does it mean to problem solve in these highly undefined problems? What is the skill that we're trying to teach? So even, building the game was incredibly difficult, because it became a matter of, well, what do we focus on? What can we call computational thinking? And so, the papers that we're writing, the abstracts that we're sending to conferences end up being something like audio-visual processing in sequential and working memory puzzles between a musical stimulus, and then our second game is a visual game. Where instead of hearing sounds and using the sounds to solve the sequential problem, it's a visual memory problem where, a runner block is navigating a series of walls, and you have to place holes in the walls to allow this runner block to pass through, and that constitutes a correct response. And trying to echo the various parameters of music. So music has pitch up and down, and it's in time. So how do we create visual puzzles which mirror that closely, so that when we present a paper, people are less tempted to go, well, these games are completely arbitrary. Why would you consider them to be the same? So we did an initial pilot with these 2 games and with the FNIR scanning, and we saw some functional connectivity differences, which were interesting. And so I don't know what it means yet. I don't know if I'm going to accomplish the goal, and maybe it would be Fulbright gave me this opportunity to dream about what it might be to be a scientist, and I'm rapidly finding that the faith dream, the jump into science, is almost the most important part of science. To have an idea and then want to go and research it, but I think it's kicking off a wider range of research where I'm understanding the brain more deeply, and at least whether or not I can say yay or nay, programmers and musicians are closely linked. We'll definitely be able to say, something about how the brain is processing music versus puzzles, whether it's a high cognitive load, low cognitive load, and then studies that come after that. I think we're gonna do a full collection very soon, a 20-person study in March or April. And that data, with more people, will have a better sense of whether these games actually show something, and hopefully they do. And if not, they'll tell us something as well. But and originally, and there's follow-up studies to extend the games as well in towards interdisciplinary studies, where what happens if we combine the two approaches? Does the way that people process things, if you have sound and visuals, is that a stronger connection than just one or the other? And I have some experience trying to create music games at the game school, and it was an utter failure at USC when I tried to create musical puzzles. And so in some ways, the neuroscience research here is a second chance to try to create these musical games, because truly, when you're trained as a musician, for as long as I have been, your hearing changes, how you think changes, and so you forget how other people process things. It's not the same, and you have this skill difference which you have to consider. I'm not sure if I covered what the neuroscience question was, but I sort of went around it a bunch.
I think your answer sounds, like you're doing very interesting, very complicated research as well. But if I were to summarize it to the general audience who might not be as into neuroscience as you are, I think what you're trying to do is to understand how the brain processes music inputs and visual inputs, and then from there trying to get some sort of clarity on, and then what you could do about it, that will come next, right? But the main goal, I think, is to understand a little bit more about how the brain processes musical input. Am I correct?
Yes, I think that's a great summary.
I was quite also curious about, so you're working with kids mostly?
Yeah, our studies are between 10 and 12 years old, though as part of the community, I'm also teaching. I'm assisting my professor with computational classes. We're working with Legos and teaching really young kids, like 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old, to understand objects in three-dimensional space. And computational thinking is about, like, step one, step two, step three. How do I solve problems? If I tell a kid, make me a motorcycle, that's a really hard thing to do if you're 5. And so working, exercising those types of skills, that's a big part of what I'm doing at the school that I'm working at.
So let's say you're working with children from ages 4 to 12. Is it a different experience than working with kids in the US, working with kids in Brazil? Have you found that you needed to adapt on the way you approach them as a teacher? Or is it like something that actually made you realize, wow, these kids are, in a different country, they speak a different language, but it's kind of the same thing. Like, how did you feel about those cultural differences when it comes to the children you work with?
Uh, my experience with the younger age group in particular was not super extensive in the U.S. Like I taught group classes, but oftentimes I was just running around trying to get them to learn enough so that I could keep my job, and it was very very rapid teaching in New York, but the kids are just so sweet, and in Portuguese they're so carinhoso. They just love to hug and touch, and one thing that I'm realizing is when I first showed up there, I'm a 6'3" Anglo guy, and I tower over most of these kids. They're at least a quarter my size in some cases. And so they look at me like some kind of giant that walked into their world. And but as they've gotten used to me, like they'll come up and hug me and they'll hang off my arms, and it's like, and my initial reaction was, as an American, was to go, oh, no, we need space. I know physical touch because like Title IX laws and all this other stuff. Like, I don't want a problem. But the kids are, and I looked around and I realized, oh, they just want to be close to you because they like you and you're teaching them, and and so I had to calm down a little bit in terms of allowing myself to be affectionate back, so that they didn't feel like I hurt their feelings. They're saying like, no, go away. I do think it's different. I mean, between the two schools in Brazil, so I'm working with a community in Santo André and a nonprofit that's helping provide daycare for the comunidade over there. And like, the difference between the private school and that school is very marked in terms of where the kids are, how they behave, what their language is like, and that difference I have not seen in the United States, where there's such a divide between like socioeconomic levels. And I think navigating that has been really new for me, where it's put in perspective the behaviors. And so what is considered lower income versus higher income in the U.S. is not as stratified as I've seen here. And certainly our teaching approaches have to change to address, what the culture of the student is. And it makes me want to go back to the United States and encourage more of that, to try to close those gaps and to try to serve students more organically than provide, one single solutions to particularly to young kids, where they really need individualized attention to a certain degree. I think that's probably the biggest difference. But then again, kids are kids, and they're so honest and sweet, and in that way they're exactly the same. But one speaking Portuguese, and I have to listen really hard, and they can't understand me half the time. So that's always kind of cute when I say something to them and they're like, I don't know what you said, and they walk away.
And I think, there's a lot to that answer. I think definitely in Brazil, it's a country where, the social divide is quite strong, and you can really feel it. So I think it's also an interesting subject, right? To think about how to adapt, to different audiences, or how to create a more organic approach where you don't have to adapt so much, that it kind of goes, regardless of where you are. But I did want to go back a little bit to the whole, concept of music and neuroscience. I have been thinking about, when I was preparing for this interview, I was thinking about, those brain surgeries that sometimes are done in musicians, where, in order to kind of protect the person's brain during the procedure, they ask them to continue playing some instrument while they're in surgery. I'm sure, most people have heard about something like that. So usually all over the news. Um, and, it got me thinking about how music and neuroscience are intertwined, right? They are completely different, fields. We're talking about art versus science. But in a way, I do feel like, they're kind of intertwined, right? They are, you can't have one thing without the other at the same time, So have you come to any new conclusions, or how do you think about the fact that, these two fields, which are, seemingly so different and so far apart, are actually really, really connected?
Oh boy, yeah. The music has been this enigma for romanticization and intellectualization in some cases. When I was teaching world music at USC, we had there was this joke that we had, that everyone says music's a universal language. We'd have students saying this all the time, and as a statement, it's so true. But in so many ways, it's like the tip of an iceberg, that it's almost silly. It's trite to say that. The it's a universal language, but it's culturally based, it's individual, it's highly complex, it conveys information without being syntactical. And how many people like Steven Pinker and then great academics, Levinson. Um, there's a neuroscientist at Stanford, music's neuroscientist, who's a musician and who's doing neuroscience as well. Um, the conversation about language and music and then neuroscience and how do we process things, how do we understand ourselves, how does our experience get reflected in the firing of regions or networks of brain cells. I think the enigmas surrounding the brain by themselves are fascinating, and then music is a very natural partner to that because it's not as explicative as, say, me writing a poem or me writing a book, where it makes us feel things, but we can point to very, very specific aspects of why I might feel those things, perhaps without as extensive training as you may need in music to parse a Beethoven sonata in terms of its structure and like why you might be feeling some of the emotions. And then, of course, just art in general. The music, art, human experience in art is always going to be important, regardless of where technology goes. I'm seeing though that the emerging technologies to scan the brain, because neuroscience, it's a relatively young profession, I would say. It seems like it has its historical roots in the end of the 1800s and the 1900s, but really the last few decades it's exploded in popularity. And then now musical implementations of neuroscience are becoming ever more important. The system that we're using to investigate prefrontal cortex, the FNIR system, that's a very recent, last decade or two type of technology, and it's a lesser used technology. So as we find new ways to investigate the brain with different cost benefits. So the system we're using is great for if you've got kids that are fidgeting and they're moving and it doesn't create lots of artifacts. With other systems, you have to putting a child in a giant MRI machine and making them sit still for, just a period of time. That's terrifying, unethical in most cases. And it's difficult to do. Whereas this is just a little cap that we stick on their heads and it's a game. And there are things about the brain that when we observe it, it's very difficult. And so because music is so social, some of the work that is happening at UFIABC is about, scanning the brain and social connection between two musicians, the social connection between a musician and the audience. I think the neuromusic has the capacity to inform education, how we connect with other people. One of the things that I'm seeing in Brazil that I love is that music is democratized in a way where people don't feel the pressure to have to perform perfectly. They want to play the guitar, they want to pull out their pandeiro, they want to play together communally, and it's building community in a way that I didn't experience firsthand in the U.S. as much. And one has to wonder, like, what kinds of benefits does that have for your mental health in a subjective sense? And then, can we scan those types of markers? But I do see it growing, and I'm kind of excited that I stumbled into neuromusic as a potential career path, and that, in some ways, being a conservatory trained musician positions me perfectly, because it is being able to design experiments to target specific things. I don't know if I'd be able to do that well enough if I didn't have 10 years of teaching students and this intense social connection and understanding, how I taught myself and how to teach others. But it's really exciting where it's going to go.
I think it's really exciting as well. And I love how your journey has kind of led you from one thing to another until you finally got to where you are. And I think, like you said, it's like a sort of like a perfect path. Um, what would you say to someone who's considering applying for a Fulbright Award abroad, but might be a little skeptical that they get in? So I have seen You discuss about how you were so surprised that, you were accepted for this award to study neuroscience because you didn't have the formal training specifically in neuroscience. But as we've discussed, you had so many other experiences that prepared you to start working with this. And I do think that is, generally we hear people who, hear about the Fulbright Awards and they think it's great, but they feel like they're not Fulbright material, because it's like a super scientific program or something. And in fact, Fulbright is such a diverse program. There's so many opportunities. And there's also, I think, the possibility to apply for something that you thought maybe you'd never be able to do, you know? You have a strong project and if you have enough knowledge of that, you might get an award. So what would you say to somebody who's right now, because we do have applications open now for US scholars, and probably by the time this episode airs, the applications will be open as well for US students. So there's a lot of awards all over the world. So what would be your advice for somebody who's sitting there considering whether to apply or not?
If you have a desire to understand other cultures, and I think it's something that in the United States, if you haven't spent time abroad, living in another place with other people, with other languages, it's just so important. I think I pay lip service to it, to the experience, because I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was probably important based on the environment of academia or the environment that I was working in. But being in this experience now, it's teaching me about what does it mean to live in different contexts and to find happiness and contentment in being generous. I mean, if you're excited about understanding new people, learning constantly, representing the United States in a way that is where you might be the one American some people meet for a while, and you can color the representation of this relationship between the two countries. It's a wonderful experience, and I'm kind of case in point in that I threw out this wild idea. I managed to find an affiliate that was on board with sort of taking me under his wing, because he knew that while I didn't have the official, I've got a doctorate in neuroscience and I'm here to do neuroscience, but I had enough interest and capacity across other things working with that affiliate to come up with a program, a very specific and narrow research project. Anyone can be a Fulbright scholar. Absolutely anyone. And I think it's more about human connection. If you're open to being humbled by the outside world from the United States, and you want to be more involved with that, then this is an incredible program for you, and it behooves you to try to go somewhere. The question really becomes which country. Brazil is, an incredible location. I mean, it's got so many, there's so many reasons to come here, across the sciences, across the social studies, and the food, the language, the natural, ambience. The people are so kind. I think it was a top producer. I think you guys had the most interest in the last cycle, and it stands to reason why. And also, Fulbright is for sort of all ages. The scholar awards versus the student awards. I finished a doctorate, and yes, I'm on the older side, but I feel perfectly at home with this experience, being at this stage in my life. And the community here, the community of the Fulbright community, and where you land, you can really make the experience what you want to make it. Though it's definitely be thinking about, like, how can you give back to these communities, because it's such a gift to be able to come and spend this much time with them.
So that being said, I was curious if you have a favorite thing about life in Brazil.
Yeah, I love that people say hi to me from out of nowhere more than anyone else did in the U.S. Like, they'll be walking their dogs, and they'll say, bom dia, bom tarde, boa noite. And being in New York, or in a big city in the U.S., people, they ignore, because, you don't know who's talking to you, what they want. And even though I'm in São Paulo, I found this little region where I don't leave the 2 or 3 blocks from my apartment to the school, to the supermarket, to the gym. And it's people tease me for it, but I just love it because I go and I work at the school, and the school is, the log line would be, I just love the community building here, where I feel like I've been welcomed in a way that I've never experienced before. And that welcome has come at multiple layers. It's both, what I'm bringing to the community, what I'm helping with the kids, but the parents. I performed at the graduation for the school back in December, November, and that was an amazing experience where I performed for 500 or 600 parents, and they all loved the performance. And I played with the kids. They sang Michael Jackson. They sang in English, and I was playing guitar, and I worked with them for some months to get ready for their performance. And so I got to connect with the kids and connect with the teachers, and I have lunch with them. So I think working with that school, working with my affiliate, and just having a schedule that's community focused has been my favorite thing. Um, and that's why I don't leave my little corner of São Paulo.
Yeah, that sounds amazing, especially in such a huge city that you were able to find kind of like a smaller, you know, way of life. So I find that really interesting. Thank you for sharing. So we're coming to the end of our interview, but I do want to ask you one last question, which is, what are your plans for the future? So it sounds like you have so many interests and you're working on so many different things. So what do you want to do, with all of the knowledge you're acquiring now? What are your plans for where, your kind of future path, career path, but also personal life is going after this award?
I don't know. I strongly feel that I want to follow the humanity wherever it leads me. So finding, whether it's an academic community, a private company, staying in Brazil is a really strong option. I'm exploring that because there's a lot more I want to do even beyond the grant. So something I'm considering. But I've learned that for me to be successful in my academic interests, I need to have this sort of I'm at home feeling. And it's not necessarily true that it's like my home country at a given moment or my home community, but I'm finding it here in Brazil. So Brazil seems to be the place. But as you said, I've got lots of interest, and this stuff can change rather quickly between the programming and the AI and the music and who knows? I think right now I'm focusing on supporting my professor and the lab. I think I'm going to be going to Chile as a Brazilian representative for neuroscience. Just recently that occurred, and maybe we're doing a concert potentially at the end of the grant for interdisciplinary music and showing off neuroscience and interactivity and music together. So I think I'm just going to keep creating interesting projects and seeing who's interested and then going where and doing them. And that's the most exciting thing for me, honestly. But what that means and where it goes, I have no idea.
I think that sounds great. And that's probably, when you're open to what life brings you, I think that's a good indicator that you're happy with, your life and your work. So I'm really glad to hear that. Joseph, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's been really interesting and super excited about all of the work that you're doing here. And I wish you the very best with the rest of your research. Thank you to all of our listeners. We will leave Joseph's website and also his Fulbrighter profile linked here in the description of this episode, so you can reach out to him if you have similar interests or if you would like to support his research in any way. Thank you so much, Joseph. Do you have anything else you'd like to add before we go?
I just wanted to say thank you for Fulbright for letting me come, and I was so appreciative of getting the chance to speak with you and share some of my story. I hope to be able to share more great updates soon as more things play out and more projects appear. But it's been a pleasure speaking with you, Gabby. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, to all of our listeners, a big thank you as well. We will see you next time with the next episode of the Fulbrighter podcast.